Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to talk to you about our chat. What we're going to talk about today is how to build a successful AI practice in an organization environment. So I'll start with the outlines. What we're gonna hear today in this presentation would be mainly around who we are, what we do in WSIB, and what is generally AI and how everybody is using it. And when it gets to the public sector, what would be considerations of AI in government and the public sector, how to build an AI strategy, and how we using and building that AI strategy at WSIB. So to start with who we are and what we do, our organization is named WSIB, or Workplace Safety Insurance Board of Ontario. Who we are a government entity that for employers we provide no-fault collective liability insurance to access industry-specific health and safety information. We help workers for their loss of earnings and healthcare expenditure due to different injuries and accidents that happen at them during the work times. And working employers get help from us to get back to work when such injury happens. So we are worker compensation board, and we help Ontarians as a monopoly in the province of Ontario in Canada with getting back to work when such injuries happens. We have a very small team of around 20 people here at WSIB called Advanced Analytics. Their focus is on more predictive modeling, data science, and general AI practices. In order to just show you how big is our customer base and how we do our work, we can say there are around 320,000 businesses that are covered by our insurance board. We get something around 210 to 211,000 claims a year per average. We serve something around 4.8 million workers in Ontario, and we have a bunch of information on how much we pay for their healthcare, how much we pay for the loss of earnings and pension and all others across the time. As I mentioned earlier, by government rule, we are the monopoly in terms of providing that worker compensation in province. So pretty much we have a very widespread range of customers and clients across 16 different type of industries. And there are a bunch of numbers that you can see on the screen that regarding how much we pay and what are the big drivers of cost or type of injuries we deal with on day-to-day business. Getting to what is AI and who is using it, there are very different definitions of AI or machine learning around the world. There are lots of them are widely accepted. I think the one that we embrace here at WSIB and we believe on is my favorite quote from Andrew Ng that defines machine learning as making sure that computers can do work without being explicitly programmed, and in a way that improve the quality of life and helping humans to do better work. We totally believe in that one. As a government agency helping people getting back to work, we want to make sure every technology or every consideration that we make here, make sure that we are improving the quality of life of our citizens and and human being. To go over that, how AI is being used these days in industry, we look at the global pattern of AI, as you can see, and I think might be kind of commonly understood. There are different maturities across different continents and across different geographical locations. While North America and Europe are leading in terms of putting AI into production and using it as a virtual agents to do the jobs on a daily basis, the other continents and places are speeding up and try to get on board and build their strategies and products in the next 12 to 24 months. And they're over time, over the life cycle of those data products, they move from prototypes into the products, and the more and more time goes by, we will see in the more widespread of use of AI in any industry, including the public sector. So the other consideration is there was a forecast done but Cognate Analytica back in 2019 that regarding what will be the outlook of adoption of AI across different industries across the globe. And as you can see, like, most of the companies and or entities who are going to use AI will push their focus more regarding like robotic process automation, more on conversational system like chatbots, or they're going to use different cognitive systems regarding like, image or pattern recognition, or using the computer vision. While other like use cases and hot topics like, autonomous driving and more sophisticated stuff are getting some gain over the next 5 years. But still, I think the dominant use case for the popular application of AI would be around automation and conversational chatbots. So when it gets to the public sector, lots of people have an aha moment that, okay, how a government entity can use AI or use any type of technology because of like all unconscious biases and consideration regarding public sector. So here we want to focus that, okay, how it will be used and what are considerations to make. So talking about the opportunities in AI for a public sector, I think the opportunities for AI in public sector is not that different from the ones that are offered to any other industry. But it might start with more smaller and baby steps. So it starts from more automation of the routine processes or repeating, like speeding up the repetitive tasks, focusing to improve the delivery of the service that is getting to the citizens. And obviously this can be obtained by increasing the efficiency in the operations in day-to-day business. To make sure, like, some citizenry across all levels of governments, from provincial to federal to all these levels are available. And I think the integration of the systems can improve towards a more digital government, which ease the quality of work and service delivered to the citizens. But definitely it has its own unique challenges. And some of these challenges I think are everywhere, but the emphasis on how to focus and which challenges and obstacles to remove would be a little bit different from public sector to private sector. I start with the data and skills. Obviously, if I was going to present this presentation to you guys maybe 2 years ago, I would talk a lot about data, but I think over time, there is no hidden thing for any leader in any organization, including the public sector, that how much value the big data and data has. And I think obtaining the right data and data quality becomes more attainable and feasible in the organization, but it can not be less emphasized at how important it is, to have the right data. I think the biggest gap and challenges for most of the public sector will be on AI skills. Data skills right now are in better supply, but when it gets to AI, definitely the right talent is in short supply. And then usually organizations try to use some incentives to attract high caliber talents, with better compensation, some flexibility, and some perks that they offer to make the job more appealing, while organizations with tighter rules on hiring and limited budget, like government, may suffer a little bit through attracting the right talent into their AI shop. And that would be something that I think systemically exists, and it will be challenging to move on from. Moving from that, going to effective use of data, obviously, organization should have capabilities to understand how to access and manage data. And if they cannot understand how to manage and govern their data, they cannot take advantage of AI. When we get to the big data, all those 3 or 4 big V's of volatility, volume, and all those concepts that relates to the big size of data, I think most of organizations, both in private and public right now, understand how the need for those is and how to create and handle those. But I think what's missing piece for public sector organization is they now understand what are data assets. They have some rudimentary understanding of their data assets, but when they want to public many of data question that, okay, how many data elements they have across different databases, or for the same kind of question where they can find answers, they are falling short. And I think this is the main concern would be like, moving toward having a proper data governance, considering all the history of data of over years over the legacy systems. Having a proper data governance strategy would be a big roadblock. And I think it's something that needs to be considered as a big challenge moving forward to use of AI. Because as I mentioned earlier, if you don't know your data assets, I think getting to the AI is far outreach. The other challenge, which I think is very unique for most of public sector organizations, is like the existing procurement mechanisms. So the inability for governance to avoid vendor load lockings. Like, when the vendor locking happens is like, if you treat your outcome of your AI application as an IP, and it was delivered by a vendor to you guys, like, next time that you need to recalibrate or reuse the same or retrain even the same model for solving different problem, you bump into some legal issues with the IP, and you cannot bring a new vendor on board. And there are lots of legislation that limit the way of how to bring counterparties on board to help, which is, I think, something that can be work around, and with some maneuver around, with doing a due diligence and understanding the requirements of AI might be different from the traditional IT contracts. This can be something that most of organization can overcome. When it gets to the next one, which is the AI environment, I think it has its unique challenges. There was a recent study done by Deloitte in Canadian market, and the study, I think it was back in, it was published, I think, in December 2019. And they found that right now in Canada, there are something around 800 AI companies. And of those, more than, most of them, more than majority of them are less than 50 employees. So they're small companies. And more than 50% of those does not exist even 5 years ago. So the number of the players in this game of AI and the people who help you to provide AI environment is changing every day. It's growing, and for organizations like government to be on top of those players in the game and choosing the right provider for the AI market would be a very challenging piece. It's not the same for example, when you go to cloud computing. For the cloud computing, the key player in the market, and pretty much when you get to AWS, Google, and and Microsoft and Alibaba, compared, they cover 85 or 86% of the offering. So pretty much you have limited number of the big vendors with longer footprint in the industry, more trusted leaders that traditionally conservative culture of government can rely on and trust. But when it gets to the AI, that becomes a little bit challenging, that which one is the right technology, and which one, and even knowing about all the players in the game would be very tricky and time consuming for them. And the other one would be the legacy culture. Obviously, legacy culture is, I think, the first thing that comes to everybody's mind when they talk about the government. Obviously, everywhere that you want to adapt and bring in new technology, there will be challenges. The challenges of change management and bringing something to a population which are not early adapters by nature, that their culture is maybe late majority in the sense of accepting a change. This would be obviously very challenging. In parts of private sector, there are lots of strong cultures regarding let's experiment. Let's encourage employees to innovate, try new things, and go beyond and in the regulations. But I think when it gets to the government, the culture and legalities and constraints around that makes it a little bit difficult to innovate in a comparable manner to the private sector. But it doesn't mean that it's not possible. Obviously, it has its own different challenges and ways of doing it. And the last but not the least, I think it would be the AI ethics. AI ethics, when it gets to the public sector, ethics play much more sensitive role in how technology is replacing human and doing some work or assisting in those, which I will discuss for AI ethics in more details in coming slides. So what are the ethical consideration of AI for a public entity or a government? I think when I look at the ethical AI, you have to start with regulatory and governance, right? You have to say that, okay, how do we allow the development of AI application for a public good, to help deliver the mandate of a public nonprofit organization. And what's the moral status of using AI machines or robots to make decisions? And who would be liable for these decisions, and all those implications. And how we are using all the rules and transparency when we implement AI algorithms to prevent any biases or any unwanted outcomes. So that would be one of the biggest consideration for any ethical AI development in public sector. The next would be the morality, right? So do we have a right that we stop using the same robot that we created yesterday? Can we destroy that? So are they belonging to the organization, or they become a part of the public wealth? Who owns them? Who can decide when they finish their life? And what if that by unwantedly the algorithm builds its own belief or its own state of learning, gets installed and creates some biases that we cannot even notice until very late? So those are all those morality considerations that should be considered when building an AI in an ethical way inside public sector. The next would be the safety and security. So one of the things that gets to safety and security is how we make sure that the outcomes of the products of the AI, directly or indirectly, are not harmful or not against the public good. How do we make sure that if something bad happens or one outcome causes some damage, how we can cover and how can we recover from that situation? And who will be responsible when it happens, and what will be our mitigation plan or rescue strategy when we get some security harm by unwanted designs and outcome of an AI application. The next would be the legitimacy and non-reproduction. So I think this is very important, because when it gets to the government, everybody is asking, is the decision made by this algorithm legitimate? Is the application is being used for the right purpose, or unwantedly, or even unconsciously will being triggering some agenda? It might be a partisan agenda, it might be some unwanted and unconscious bias. So how we know that the training data is legitimate, how we know that the quality control data is right, how we know that data collected in the first place is right. And I understand this will apply for every decision that any private sector company makes, but when it gets to the public sectors, the cost of such mistakes and such pitfalls will be huge, burden on citizens, on taxpayers, and on the partisan parties, the political parties who are running the government. It have huge impact. And I think those are the stoppers. The stoppers that, okay, if I'm going to do it, you have to do it right. If there is any risk for it, who will be blamed for? And then if there is somebody to be blamed for, usually there will be resistance even going forward with that. So the other piece would be that regarding socioeconomic perfect, how are we causing loss of jobs? Are we causing some people losing their work and moving to next step because we are replacing humans with the robots? And obviously this is a challenge, especially in a unionized environment, that most of the staff getting unionized and have some protection, and there will be some change management and good ethical practice needs to be put in place before going that. So what would be our framework for public sector leaders to overcome that? It's simple: adhere to all privacy and ethical use practices in public sector. They are extensive. They will build to make sure that all the rights of citizens will be fully observed and you do not cross any lines, and watch all those red tapes. The other piece would be that they make sure you have policies and guidelines for development of AI, and make sure those are aligned with existing policies and guidelines. And if there are parts of they're not clear, make sure bring some transparency to those. The next would be that make sure any database that you use for your training does not have any systemic biases, and make sure you understand it might be there, it's unconscious, and you have to go there and bring strategies and techniques to remove those, and make sure you are embracing the diversity and inclusion in every step of the way. And make sure have another look for all the things that you put in your algorithms. Beside the data, lots of time unconsciously, our algorithms will build like bias. It's very hard to detect. It's so might be one unwanted thing, but I think continuous monitoring and evaluation could help to make sure if such thing is happening, go and fix it. And bring transparency. I think it is the biggest consideration is when it gets to the government, everybody look at the black box. The more transparent you are with how you're using your technology and building your algorithm, people will trust and you have better buy. So moving to the next one would be, okay, now we know how to do it. So how to build an AI strategy. And I think AI strategy, I think for any strategy, going back to Michael Porter's famous article in Harvard Business Review, a strategy should tell us, like, what we are not choosing to do, like if we are avoiding what things. I think it gives us a framework and define us our red lines and like red tapes and where we should not cross. And when we start working inside those boundaries, we can find based on our goals, like something to achieve and like how to make use of those strategy for a good. As a government entity in Canada, we are having some alignment. There are existing strategy for organization like us that we have to align. And it's like, Canada's Digital Charter of Rights for Action, which is talking about where we are in terms of use of data, understanding robotics, where we are moving in the government towards use of more autonomous systems and artificial intelligence, and making sure that towards a day of an IoT, smart connected systems and societies and cities. So I think one of the things that was interesting for any public entity in Canada right now is that in the charter they're talking about the expectation of the AI global GDP of 14% higher in 2030. So it means AI should play a big role in the GDP, and if it becomes a part of public sector should be, with some lags at least, should continue that path and go towards that. So how to build a BI strategy? Obviously, every strategy have basic pillars. How we do it is we start with a vision. Okay, I know we can go very far, but how far really we want to achieve? What is our level of ambition? And then when we know what is our level of ambition in long term for AI, we go to the mission and we're saying, okay, where should I focus? And it's a very important one, right? We have to identify which problems you want to tackle. How do you want to use AI? And I think what it brings as a side effect is your plan of what you want to tackle shapes your requirements for technology. So if you are going to make very ambitiously, you might have a different technology footprint and requirement compared to something very basic and simple. And next from that would be going from the vision and the focus to the value proposition. So it's being saying obviously what AI can do good is using big chunks of data and produce insight quickly, swiftly. And do we want to just do reporting in descriptive? Do we want to go create a predictive model? Do we want to create products that prescriptive and get outlines? Or do we want to do RPA? And how we want to do it, and in each of those, how deep we want to go in our areas of a business. And obviously, for every strategy, you need to have an evaluation framework, creating a metrics to make sure you are measuring ROI, and also you're measuring all existing biases and accuracy. So when it gets to public sector, there's a huge emphasis will be more around accuracy and bias rather than ROI, because they build for nonprofit. But we have to make sure at least the costs become reasonable, and in long term, you have some saving on cost while you are working more toward removing the biases and have accuracy. When it gets to next part of the strategy, you have to identify that, okay, what are my skills and capabilities needed and what's my current state? What can I do? Can I recruit more full-time members? Can I identify my talent and send them for upskilling and teaching them the new skills? Or I should go to outsourcing and partnership. And the last piece is how to manage the change. This is a big change, moving from traditional brick and mortar kind of office to a digital office, moving from using the decision based on maybe a bunch of spreadsheets onto an output of a recommender system. These needs change, and change needs leadership. And I think this is where proper communication with all the stakeholders, creating of center of excellences, and have some transparency with the vision for scalability in future is much needed. So talking about the strategy, let's say how we use it in WSIB. Obviously, we have a mandate and vision. Our vision is we want to be insight driven, which means we want to use insights from data for every decision we are making on every day. In this organization, we built some foundations. We have processes, we have identified capabilities, we created our AI strategy. From that one, we identified there is a need for data governance strategy, enterprise knowledge management, and some standards that was built. From those, we built enterprise strategy for analytics, and now we are ready to deploy our strategies into action, and obviously start our journey to become an IDO, which is an insight-driven organization. How we use it? We use it in terms of natural language processing for chatbot, text mining, using feature engineering for different predictive models. We have process mining and optimization for automated triage processes for simple cases. We use extensively machine learning for different predictive models, non-compliance, anomaly detection. We use automated processing for RPAs for the processes that we have repetitive nature and can be done. And obviously for enabling lots of those, we use OCR a lot to convert our machine readable formats into something that can be consumed by model. And how we work, simple. We start with opportunity. We go and see what's the problem. Are we trying to solve? We look at the data to see, do we have enough data? Do we have the quality of the data? And if we pass this point, the next step would be that, do I need a report? Do I need a model, or do I looking at the AI application? And if the answer is a model, you build the model, you train the model and send it for feedback, reiteration, recalibration, and it becomes something that can go to production. We go and deploy it and make it a process. And obviously, as you can see, maybe 50% of things stay on opportunity, the next 50 get to the modeling, and maybe less than 10% makes it to the action deployment, because this needs full embedment and onboarding of lots of change management from different parties. So we believe in any AI application needs data, computation power, or infrastructure and skills. And this is how we try to build our team. We make sure we have lots of data in our organization. We are procuring, we had lots of infrastructures for computation. We are procuring more and more to scale up, and we are working to build a team of talent. And the way that our teams, our special team work at WSIB, I think would be that we start with all those buckets. We start with the business process to tell us, can we solve this problem with the data? And if the opportunity is there, we use data engineering architects in our team who goes and check the quality of the data and make sure the data can be used and have a good quality. And we have a bunch of data scientists and a statistician who their job will be creating models, fine-tuning the models, converting the hypotheses, and do some investigative analysis. And at the end, we have AI and machine learning engineers and AI scientists whose job would be for those complex models that need deep learning AI application, create an application, put it to production. And obviously, we have a leadership around that. Their job would be that to make sure all these bits and pieces work towards the vision and mission of the organization, which is becoming IDO, while delivering on results and celebrating small wins. And I think here's my last slide. So I will be happy to answer any questions.